The shipyard of Therial 9 was never quiet. Giant cranes swung like mechanical beasts. Welding drones hummed in the thin air, and the smell of metal and fuel mixed with the dry wind. Jackson Vale wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crouched under the freighter's wing, his tools spread around him like pieces of a puzzle. He had been fixing engines since he was 12, and to him, machines spoke more honestly than people ever could. Today, though, the machines were whispering something strange. He found the coolant lines scorched in a pattern that didn't match natural wear. The fuel stabilizer was out of alignment by 3 degrees, just enough to create a chain reaction if someone tried to start the engine. It wasn't just bad luck or sloppy work. Someone had done this on purpose. Jackson leaned back, heart beating faster. The freighter had been grounded for weeks, and everyone said it was because of maintenance errors. But if this ship had taken off like this, its engines would have blown apart in orbit, raining fire across the colony below. Thousands could have died. He frowned and looked around, making sure no one saw him. The Veyran overseers did not like humans snooping where they shouldn't. The tribunal's laws were clear: speak lies, spread panic, or disrupt order, and punishment was swift. Everyone remembered what happened to the woman called Lyra, the so-called tongueless witness. Jackson had heard the story many times. Lyra was a human clerk who worked in the logistics hub. Months ago, she claimed that the shipyards were being sabotaged, that someone was trying to cause an explosion big enough to cripple the colony. She warned the tribunal. She begged them to shut the docks until the systems were checked. They did not believe her. They accused her of spreading fear to cause unrest. Her trial lasted less than an hour. Her punishment was carried out the same day. The story spread fast, a warning to anyone who thought of challenging the tribunal's decisions. Lyra lost her voice forever. Since then, she had been kept under guard, forced to work in silence. Jackson stared again at the damaged parts in front of him. If Lyra had been right, then she had been punished for telling the truth. And if she had been telling the truth, whoever had done this was still out there, and planning worse. He tightened the last bolt, closed the panel, and stood. The other mechanics were busy with their own work, paying no attention to him. That was good. He didn't want attention, but he couldn't just forget this. Not now. After his shift, Jackson walked past the edge of the shipyard and through the crowded streets of the human quarter. The buildings were simple and gray, metal stacked on metal, but they felt alive compared to the perfect cold towers of the Veyran city center. Humans traded spare parts, shouted greetings, laughed. But even here, the story of Lyra's punishment had left a shadow. No one spoke too loudly. No one wanted to be next. Jackson stopped at the supply depot and asked the old keeper quietly, "Where do they keep her?" The man froze, looking over his shoulder before whispering back, "Outskirts. East Block. Don't go there, Vale. You'll bring trouble." "Thanks," Jackson said, though the man's warning only made him more certain. If the tribunal had silenced Lyra, then finding her was the only way to know the truth. As night fell, Jackson made his way toward the East Block. The wind was colder here and the streets were empty. He found the small building the keeper had spoken of, a plain metal structure guarded by a single Veyran sentinel. Its tall figure stood still, glowing eyes scanning the area. Jackson stayed hidden in the shadows, watching. Through the window, he saw her. Lyra was sitting at a small table, her hair tied back, her hands moving over scraps of paper. She was drawing, strange, precise sketches of engines, pipes, and circuit lines. She looked thinner than he expected, her face pale, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. She did not look like a liar. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for someone to listen. Jackson stepped back into the dark, his mind racing. If he could speak to her, maybe he could find out who was behind the sabotage. Maybe he could stop the next disaster before it happened. But talking to her meant getting past the guard, and that meant risking arrest. Still, he could not shake the thought that the machines had told him the truth, and Lyra had too. He clenched his fists. Tomorrow he would find a way to reach her. For the first time in years, Jackson felt like his hands were not just for fixing ships. They were for fixing something bigger, something broken in the colony itself. The next morning, Jackson could not focus on his work. Every hum of the engines reminded him of what he had found yesterday. Every tool he touched felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of a choice he had not made yet. He tried to keep his head down, but the thought of Lyra sitting alone in that room, Drawing pictures that no one cared to see haunted him. She had tried to warn everyone once and lost everything. And now she was the only one who might know what was coming next. At the end of his shift, Jackson made a plan. He waited until most of the overseers had left the shipyard for the evening, and then made his way toward the East Hab block again. This time he carried a small toolkit on his belt, not for repairing machines, but to help him slip past the lock on Lyra's door. The streets were quieter than the night before. The sky above was a dull red, reflecting the glow of the distant furnaces. When Jackson reached the block, he saw that the sentinel guard had changed shifts. The new one stood as still as a statue, scanning the surroundings with cold, glowing eyes. Jackson crouched behind a cargo crate, waiting. The guard's sensors rotated in a slow pattern, leaving a few seconds of blind spot every time it turned its head to check the far side of the street. That was his chance. He moved quickly, his steps soundless on the metal floor. When he reached the door, he pulled out a small pulse key from his kit and pressed it to the lock. The panel blinked once, then twice, before releasing with a faint click. He slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, just as he had seen through the window yesterday. Lyra sat at the same table, her head bent over a piece of paper. She jumped when she heard the door, but her eyes widened when she saw Jackson. He raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered. "I believe you." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, her breathing quick and shallow. Then she stood and moved to the table, pointing at the paper she had been working on. It was a detailed drawing of an engine core, the same type Jackson had repaired. Arrows and marks showed where she believed the sabotage had taken place. Jackson stepped closer, his heart beating fast. "This is exactly what I saw," he said. "You were right. Someone tampered with the coolant lines. If the ship had taken off..." He stopped, realizing she already knew what would have happened. Her hand gripped the edge of the table hard, as if she had been waiting for someone to confirm it. Jackson looked around and spotted a small, broken communications tablet on the shelf. He pulled out a micro-welder from his belt and worked on it for a few minutes while Lyra watched, curious. Finally, the screen lit up. "Try this," Jackson said, sliding it toward her. Lyra touched the screen and typed slowly, her fingers trembling. "You are the first to listen to me," the words appeared. Jackson swallowed hard. "Then keep talking." "Tell me everything," she typed again, faster now, her thoughts spilling onto the screen. "Someone has been sabotaging the shipyard for months. I found records of altered orders and missing parts. I warned the tribunal. They said I lied to cause panic. They called me dangerous," Jackson frowned. "Do you know who's behind it?" Lyra's face darkened as she typed. "I think it is someone high in the tribunal. They want to destroy certain ships, maybe to keep humans weak. If the next explosion happens, the humans will be blamed, and the tribunal will take full control of the colony." The room felt colder. Jackson had always known the tribunal didn't trust humans completely, but he had never believed they would go this far. "We need proof," he said finally. "If we can show everyone what you found, they can't ignore it." Lyra nodded slowly and began to gather her drawings and notes. She handed them to Jackson, her hands shaking. Before he could say anything else, a loud mechanical noise came from outside, the sound of the sentinel shifting position. Jackson's pulse jumped. "They'll notice the door was opened," he whispered. "I have to go." Lyra typed one last message. "Be careful. They are watching everything." Jackson nodded and slipped the tablet into his pocket. Then he quietly unlocked the door and waited for the guard's sensors to turn away again, before slipping back into the shadows. When he finally reached the safety of the human quarter, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. In his hands were the first real clues that could expose the truth, but they were also dangerous enough to get him arrested. Still, he could not turn back now. For the first time, Jackson realized that he and Lyra were no longer just witnesses to the colony's problems. They were part of the fight. Tomorrow he would go deeper into the shipyard, deeper than he ever dared before. Somewhere inside those hangars was the proof they needed, and he was going to find it. Jackson barely slept that night. The quiet hum of the ventilation in his small room felt louder than ever, reminding him of the freighter's damage. Engine. Lyra's words played over and over in his head. They are watching everything. If she was right, then every hour he waited put the colony closer to disaster. Someone had gone to great lengths to silence her, which meant whatever she had discovered was dangerous to them and worth protecting. At dawn, Jackson packed his tools and left for the shipyard early. Instead of reporting to his normal station, he slipped away into the maintenance tunnels that ran under the docking platforms. These tunnels were old, dusty, and half-forgotten, but Jackson knew them better than most. He had worked in them years ago repairing power conduits. He moved quickly, careful not to trigger any of the security sensors. At the end of the tunnel was a hatch that led to the restricted hangar, where the tribunal stored the biggest cargo freighters. Only approved crews were allowed in there. Jackson was not one of them. He knelt by the hatch and worked his pulse key into the lock. It clicked after a few seconds, and he slipped inside. The hangar was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of freighters stood silent like sleeping giants. The air smelled of cold metal and fresh welds. Jackson's footsteps echoed as he crossed the floor and headed toward the ship Lyra had drawn on her papers. He climbed onto the maintenance scaffold and opened the access panel. Inside, the damage was worse than he expected. Coolant lines rerouted, pressure valves loosened, and software locks removed from the fuel system. Whoever had done this had been careful but not perfect. A few tool marks remained, hidden deep in the machinery. Jackson used his scanner to record everything, his hands moving quickly but carefully. Each piece of evidence was proof that Lyra had spoken the truth, but as he worked, a sound froze him in place. The heavy clank of the hangar doors sliding open. He ducked behind the panel just as two Veyron enforcers entered, their metallic boots ringing against the floor. Their tall insect-like silhouettes moved with precision, scanning the hangar. Unauthorized access detected, one of them said in its flat mechanical voice. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. They must have noticed the hatch had been opened. He stayed perfectly still, praying they wouldn't come near the scaffold. But then one of the enforcers turned its head toward the ship he was hiding on. Its glowing eyes scanned the area, and Jackson knew he had seconds before they spotted him. He grabbed his scanner and stuffed it into his jacket. Then he slid down the scaffold as quietly as he could and ran toward the far side of the hangar. The enforcers noticed immediately. Alarms blared, filling the hangar with a piercing wail. "Stop!" one of them shouted. Jackson sprinted toward the maintenance door, his boots pounding on the metal floor. A bolt of blue energy struck the wall beside him, sending sparks flying. He didn't dare look back. He dove through the hatch and slammed it shut behind him. The lock hissed, but he knew it wouldn't hold them for long. The tunnels were darker now, lit only by flickering lights. Jackson ran until his lungs burned, finally bursting out into the human quarter. He didn't stop until he reached a storage shed and collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. His hands shook as he pulled out the scanner. The data was still there, recordings of the sabotage, proof that Lyra had been right all along. But now the tribunal knew someone had been inside their hangars. And if they checked the logs, they would know it was him. That evening, Jackson returned to the East Hab block. He tapped on Lyra's window softly until she appeared. Her eyes widened when she saw the dirt on his face and the tear in his sleeve. When she let him inside, he placed the scanner on the table. "You were right," he said, still catching his breath. "It's worse than we thought. They've been sabotaging more than one ship. The next launch could kill thousands." Lyra's hands trembled as she typed on the repaired tablet. "Then we must show everyone before it is too late." Jackson nodded. "I'll find a way, but we have to be careful. The enforcers saw me. They'll be looking for us now." Lyra stared at him for a long moment before giving a small, sad smile. She reached out and touched his arm. A silent thank you. For the first time, Jackson felt the weight of what they were about to do. It was no longer just about proving her innocence. It was about saving the colony. Somewhere deep inside the shipyard, someone was planning the next disaster. And Jackson knew that if he didn't stop them soon, there might not be a colony left to save. The night air in the human quarter was still, but Jackson's mind raced faster than the engines he had repaired countless times. He spread Lyra's notes and the scanner data across the small table in her dimly lit room. Each image, diagram, and log entry was proof of sabotage, and proof that the tribunal had ignored a warning that could cost thousands of lives. Jackson's hands shook as he touched the tablet. "We can't wait," he whispered. "If the next ship takes off, it's over." Lyra typed quickly, her fingers trembling but steady. "Then we must act. We cannot let them silence us again." Jackson nodded. He had an idea, but it was risky. They needed allies, humans who still believed in justice. Humans who were willing to risk the tribunal's wrath to stop disaster. The first person he contacted was Mara, a fellow mechanic who had been suspicious of the tribunal for months. He met her in the shadows of the shipyard, showing her the scanner data and Lyra's drawings. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. This is massive," Mara whispered. "If the tribunal finds out we have this, they'll—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "They can't find out we're planning," Jackson said. "We move carefully. Just us for now." Over the next few days, Jackson recruited a small team of trusted humans, engineers, freighter pilots, and even one Varen worker who quietly disagreed with the tribunal's methods. Each member knew the risk. Discovery could mean imprisonment, exile, or worse. Together, they worked on a plan. The goal was simple but dangerous: broadcast the evidence to every worker, pilot, and ship captain in orbit at the same time. The message had to be public and undeniable. "This is our only chance," Jackson said, standing in front of a makeshift map of the colony's communication grid. "We hit the main relay station, upload the scanner logs and Lyra's testimony. No one can erase it once it's out." Lyra nodded silently, her eyes full of determination. She typed a single line: "It is time the colony knows the truth," but the clock was against them. Jackson had learned that the tribunal had planned to move Lyra to a labor camp on the other side of the city. If that happened, they would lose her testimony forever. The broadcast had to happen before she was relocated. That night, Jackson and his team slipped into the relay station. It was heavily guarded, and every corridor was patrolled by Varen enforcers. Jackson's knowledge of mechanical systems allowed them to bypass security doors and sensor grids. Every step was tense. Every shadow could hide an enemy. When they reached the control room, Jackson took a deep breath. The room hummed with power, rows of consoles blinking with light. He connected the scanner and uploaded the files. Lyra's sketches, diagrams, and typed messages appeared on the monitors. Mara kept watch by the door. "Hurry," she whispered. "They're close." Jackson's fingers flew over the controls. The files began transferring to the colony's communication network. The monitors showed progress bars slowly filling up. Then an alarm blared. Loud, harsh, and impossible to ignore. One of the enforcers had entered the building. "Almost there," Jackson shouted. He pressed the final button. The monitors flashed green. The broadcast was live. Across the colony, screens lit up. Every human worker, every pilot, every freighter crew received the evidence. Lyra's words scrolled across the screens. "I warned the tribunal. I spoke the truth. The sabotage is real. Stop the launches." The enforcer burst into the room, glowing eyes scanning for intruders. Jackson grabbed the last console and shoved it against the doorway, giving Mara and the others a chance to escape. Sparks flew as the metal clashed with the enforcer's armored frame. Jackson ducked and ran, following a narrow service corridor that led back to the human quarter. Alarms rang in his ears, but he didn't look back. Lyra's hand pressed against his shoulder for a brief second, a silent encouragement, before she disappeared into a hidden passage he had prepared for her. Outside, the colony was changing. Humans stopped in the street, staring at screens that had once displayed orders from the tribunal. Anger and disbelief spread quickly as workers shared what they had just seen. Even some Varen administrators hesitated, their faces betraying surprise. Jackson collapsed against a wall, panting. "It's done," he whispered to himself. "They know." Lyra appeared beside him, still silent but her eyes bright. She typed one final message on the tablet. "You saved more than me today." Jackson looked at her and smiled, tired but proud. For the first time, he felt a surge of hope. Humans had fought with courage, risk, and determination. They had stood up against impossible odds, and the colony had witnessed it. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the tribunal would plan its next move. But for now, humanity had shown that it would not be silenced. Jackson knew the battle was not over. But the spark of change had begun, and it had started with a human who refused to ignore the truth. The next morning, the colony of Therial 9 was anything but ordinary. Screens across the human quarter, the shipyards, and even the smaller Varen districts were alive with images and messages. Lyra's testimony scrolled continuously, showing diagrams, evidence, and words that no one could ignore. Workers stopped their tasks, Pilots paused their preparations and freighter crews lingered in the docks. The sabotage that had once been hidden was now visible to everyone. Every line, every mark, every erased record that Jackson and Lyra had discovered was broadcasted in plain view. Jackson walked through the streets with Lyra beside him. Her hands were steady on the tablet, though her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Humans crowded around them, whispering, pointing at screens, and exchanging urgent messages. "Do you think they'll listen?" Lyra typed, her fingers shaking slightly. "They don't have a choice," Jackson said. "Everyone sees it now." Even some of the Veyron enforcers hesitated. Their glowing eyes scanned the information, and for the first time, hesitation replaced their usual certainty. Jackson knew that the tribunal relied on fear and control. Now that the fear had been replaced with undeniable truth, the balance had begun to shift. At the central plaza, the tribunal's high council convened. Alien administrators in tall metallic robes huddled around their consoles, voices low and urgent. The colony's workers had begun sending messages demanding answers. The sabotage could not be denied. One of the senior Veyron administrators finally spoke, its voice trembling slightly. "The humans, they have evidence we cannot ignore." Inside the human quarter, people began cheering quietly. The colony was awake. The humans had shown courage, and now they had a voice that could not be silenced. Jackson and Lyra moved to the shipyard. Ships that had once sat idle due to maintenance errors were now under careful inspection by human engineers. Every crew and pilot examined the data, confirming what Jackson had discovered. Sabotage had existed, and Lyra had been right all along. In the East Hab block, the guards who were supposed to relocate Lyra hesitated. They had received orders, but the public broadcast made those orders impossible to carry out. One of the younger enforcers lowered his weapon and simply said, "She cannot be moved." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She typed slowly on the tablet. "They believe me now." Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve this," he said softly. "You've been silenced for too long." The tribunal had no choice. The council announced a full inquiry into the sabotage, promising accountability for anyone involved. The punishment against Lyra was reversed. She would not only regain her freedom but be recognized as a key witness who had saved the colony. Humans across Therial 9 felt a shift in the air. Their courage, persistence, and refusal to bow down to fear had changed the course of the colony. It was more than just saving lives. It was proof that human determination, compassion, and courage could shine even under the shadow of an alien administration. Jackson and Lyra returned to the quiet of her room after the official announcements. For a long moment, they just sat together, listening to the distant hum of the shipyard that was now alive with activity and conversation. Lyra typed a simple message on the tablet. "You gave me back more than words. You gave me back hope." Jackson smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "No," he said. "You gave all of us hope." Across the colony, humans celebrated quietly but proudly. The tribunal had learned that fear could not suppress truth, and that humanity's unique qualities, compassion, determination, and the courage to act, could turn even the darkest moments into opportunity. For Lyra, the silence was still there, but it no longer felt like punishment. She had spoken in a way the tribunal could not ignore. She had won not just her freedom but the respect of an entire colony. Jackson looked at the horizon, where the sun glinted off the freighters and the towers of Therial 9. He knew challenges would come again. There would always be threats, sabotage, and fear. But the spark of humanity had been seen, and that spark would not be extinguished. Somewhere deep inside him, he realized that humans had something no machine or alien could replicate: the ability to choose courage, even in the face of impossible odds. And that choice, Jackson knew, was what would carry the colony into the future. Lyra typed one final line. "We survived. We spoke. We are heard." And for the first time, the colony felt it. The quiet, undeniable truth that humanity, even when silenced, could shine brighter than fear itself.